Good evening and welcome, everyone. Before I begin, I just wanted to give you a little heads up. If you need to use the restroom, we have one. It's available through this doorway and left all the way to the back far corner of the sacristy over on that side. And it's newly renovated. The color is repose gray, and the tiles are beautiful. Everything's, it's excellent. Is the light on? Is what light on? The room in the sacristy. It is on. It's on. It doesn't look like it, I guess, from here. So good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. For those visiting from outside the parish, my name is Father Dave Richards. I'm the current administrator of the parish here at Our Lady of Pompeii. And it's at this time of year, as you know, it can get real busy. So I'm just grateful that you stopped and paused your life a little bit to get to know a little bit more about the true Advent spirit. We're grateful that you've carved out this hour to join us to hear Msgr. Frederick Leising's presentation, which will help us invite Christ to dwell in our hearts and be ready for Christ's coming at Christmas. Before he begins, allow me to share with you some of Msgr. Leising's background in ministerial service. He holds a bachelor degree in philosophy and dual master degrees in theology and philosophy, and a doctorate of philosophy. Msgr. Leising served as the guidance counselor and acting principal at Notre Dame High School in Batavia from 1976 to 1986. In 1976, I was 4 years old. From 1987 to 1990, his duties included professor of philosophy and vice rector at Christ the King Seminary, and in 1990, president rector of the seminary. In 2012, he was honored with the Catholic Diocese of Buffalo Curiae of Ars Award for his continuing strong support of vocations in the diocese. Msgr. Leising's parish assignments have included St. Mary Parish in Canasarega and Portageville, St. Mary of the Assumption, Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and Sacred Heart of Jesus parishes. Please join me in welcoming Msgr. Fred Leising. Also, I wanted to welcome not only you, but anybody watching as we are streaming this online. So if you are interested in following us during weekend masses for the homebound, if you'd like to go in our website, olpparish.com, and you'd be able to watch everything. Thanks, Msgr.
I wore my Advent sweater. Are you ready for this? You know, every year I've been hearing more and more about leave the light on for you, but this is the first parish where I heard leave the light on for you in the bathroom. A new penitential place, the bathroom. I'd like to begin tonight by sharing with you seems strange since we're still in Advent, but I want to share with you a Christmas homily. This was written by someone I know. It appears in a periodical called Emmanuel, Eucharistic Spirituality. Let me just share this with you, and then I'll get to the major part of my talk. Christmas has come again, so our memories of Christmases past will return to us. Whatever we have planned for this Christmas will now unfold, perhaps with a few surprises. For a few thousand years now in our world, a wondrous diversity of cultural expressions has paid homage to Christmas. It is hard to imagine that for tens of thousands of years, there was no Christmas. Human beings have been here for 500,000 years. Christmas has only been celebrated for 2,000 years. Most people in human history have no knowledge of Christmas, nor of any other of the great stories and the great events that define the Christian faith. Christmas now is not only highly anticipated, we rely upon it. We rely upon Christmas to invite us to be compassionate and generous and joyful, perhaps because we haven't always been that thing the rest of the year. Christmas reveals a mysterious, transcendent, surprising love, unimagined and timeless. God has become one of us. Our identity is no longer in doubt. We are mediators of God's Spirit. This is a choice, not an assurance. Is it any wonder that such a possibility has elicited beautiful music and expansive art? We can hardly wait for each Christmas to come so we can decorate our homes, our streets, our businesses, and public places. Worship places themselves are now beginning to glisten with more candles, wreaths, creaches, poinsettias, and tree-fitting baubles of all sorts. It's hard not to be humming a familiar Christmas carol, especially now because they begin around Halloween. We Christians on this day proclaim glad tidings to our world, indeed to all of creation. This day celebrates a beginning, a birth of a child to a Jewish couple who are not at home, a couple obliged by a ruthless empire to do a census of its conquered peoples. This couple is poor, but they have each other's love. So much to them is unknown, and there will be many surprises as a result of birthing this child. Now, however, they experience simply the good news of having a child. This child, too, soon will become a man and will become the center of all of history. All human stories will radiate to him and from him. This child comes in time and place, yet transcends both of them. In and through this child, we will come to know the true identity of our Creator. We will experience that identity in his name, Jesus. He will enflesh for us what it means to be human in the divine image. In him, we will sense our need for changing, growing, and being God's people. This is a process of more than a lifetime. Its completion is actually an amazing grace. This year, the scripture features Luke's nativity narrative at midnight and John's poetic announcement of it in the daylight. The ordinary produces the extraordinary for Luke. For John, when God speaks, creation happens. And at a time that word takes flesh, God continues to say Jesus until a whole new world comes to be forever. So we gather at Eucharist on Christmas Eve and day to hear God's word in sacred scripture over bread and wine, and to each other in peace and goodwill. What we do at liturgy at Christmas, indeed on every day, is powerfully allow the spoken word made flesh to dwell in our hearts. So, Merry Christmas to all. Become what you have received. Bring glad tidings to others. Christmas lives because you live with its power to be and bring good news. Isn't that a wonderful homily? I wrote it. How's that for pride, but I'm here to talk about humility. Well, some of my thoughts have been encouraged by my recent reading of a book by the wonderful Franciscan spiritual writer. In fact, I think it's going to be his last book, at least that's what he claims, even though he's even younger than me by a few years. His name is Richard Rohr, Franciscan, and the book is called The Universal Christ. And the subtitle is How a Forgotten Reality Can Change Everything We See, Hope For, and Believe. I think it's quite an extraordinary book that comes out of a lifetime of trying to answer the two questions that I pose in this evening's talk. That is, who is God and who are we? And what's the relationship that ought to be unfolding between each of us? The truth is, already I've said something about who God is, and that is, God is relationship. You know, most Catholics probably don't have as much a sense of this as they ought, and maybe that's a result of us who preach to them often, and that is, words are not sufficient for capturing who God is. In theology, one of the first things you learn is that all language about God is analogical. What that means is we take our human words made to talk about human things and apply them to God, as if God were almost a human being, but God is not, except in the person of Jesus. So we're challenged, therefore, to understand that the words, in some ways, these qualities that are identified with being human are also can be applied to God, but they're applied in a transcendent way, a way that supersedes anything that we could possibly imagine. So the truth is, that's why in traditions like those of Father Rohr and others, the Benedictines, Carmelites, and others, usually they say the best way to be attentive to God is shut up and be quiet. In other words, silence is necessary to commune with the divine. And that silence is necessary in order to be a listener, and not so much to be a speaker. If I say to you, I'd like you to pray, I bet most of you would say, you're thinking I'm telling you right away that you should be talking with God. The good nuns taught me that's what prayer was. It's conversation with God. But it's a conversation. That means the other party has something to say too, which means I need to listen. And too often I'm just talking about my ills, somebody else's ills, whatever, but not listening. And listening is important to getting to know somebody. I mean, if like I'm going to get to know you, it's not important that I simply converse toward you, but I converse with you. So that you're learning something about me, but I'm also learning something about you. And in that mutual exchange, hopefully a kind of bond is created, a kind of union is created. And that's important for defining this. Well, so as it is in terms of God and us. We're not the only thing that's ever been created, are we? In fact, as far as we know, creation, at least from our limited ability to discern things, has been around for about 13.7 billion years. And if you put that all on a clock, we're here at the last second. So we're really new arrivals here into this experience. And it makes sense, as I think Father Rohr emphasizes in his book, that when we think of Christmas, and the other word we would use for Christmas is the birth of Christ, or the incarnation, the enfleshment of God, which is so incredible when you think about it. I mean, no one ever gave any thought to that before in any way. But people always did. Many different religions always had a sense that the creation had to represent the Creator. There's something of the Creator in the creation. Poets used to call it the spark of the divine is in the creation. Something very real about God is in everything. Therefore, the respect we need to have for creation, all of it, should come from our belief and our conviction and our attendance to that realities are not simply matters of appearance to us, but they have a depth that requires us to go further. In other words, there's a looking within that's much more important than a looking without. Imagine if I made judgments on each one of you by simply taking a look at you. And I would make all my judgments simply based on that. How superficial would that be? How would when I get to anything that's really even that important? But if I take the time to get beyond appearances and to get to the within, and with us as human beings, that primarily happens on the level of conversation, on the way of day-to-day relating, and through the levels of our friendships and our connections, however they unfold, then that going within creates a different form of unity at different levels that allows us to never feel alone and to feel that somehow the adventure that defines our life is not singular, it's not isolated, it's connected. It's connected. And I would submit to you that what has been revealed to us in the person of Jesus is something that has been unfolding long before Jesus appears in human history. But we weren't always very attentive to it because we weren't listening. And remember, we're not even here for most of it. We're here for human history. We're not here for history itself, the history of the creation. We're new arrivals to all of that. So when we start to think about what should be our relationship to God, God's relationship to us, the traditional way of thinking about it is God's the creator, I'm the creature. So therefore, in some ways, I should exercise a certain obeisance to God. God's the authority. God's the power. Someone who can create out of nothing is majesty, glory, etc. And our praise has often reflected that. But with Jesus, we suddenly get to God present to us and God present for us, but in human flesh, in humanity itself. And we don't usually think about Jesus that way. We've divinized Jesus. We've forgotten that our teaching tells us Jesus is human and divine. And I would submit to you, so are you. So are you. You may not have been born of a virgin, and you may not have been planned for all eternity in some sense, although I suspect that's true too. But you are only going to be as human as Jesus was if you put on Jesus, which is what St. Paul urges us to do, which means you too must, in some sense, assume these two natures. You begin with this human nature, but remember, because it's created by God, and God is in everything created that is good, and therefore God's already part of what defines you. And Jesus will confirm this with his resurrection. In other words, he's saying to us, your life is certainly not meant to be simply encapsulated in X number of years here, but rather it has unending dimensions to it that are pure grace shared with you by God, by the Creator. And so you don't exhaust your life here. You just begin it here. And so it goes on and on and on. What's the nature of that? That is mostly speculative. But we believe that we're called ultimately to be part of the union of persons that define God, the Trinity. And that's the call. So our challenge here, not only in Advent, but at any other time of our lives, is to understand that I'm not alone. There's a divine presence lives within me. And this should be even more radically made aware of by Catholics. Because what do you do when you come to liturgy? You commune directly with the divine. In the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. You are not just you are also Christ within you. You've consumed seemingly by way of appearances bread and wine. But that bread and wine is sacrament. That bread and wine carries with it a power and a meaning that is so real that it defines the very person of Jesus. And while that's miraculous, it is not uncommon in the larger universe. The way one theologian put it very well, I think he said, is if God can present his presence to you in such simple things as bread and wine, what's to prevent him from sending his presence to you in any other form? It's God, God's creator. God, and then the magnificent part, of course, about the Jesus story, and thus Christmas and the birth, is that God will reveal himself as love. God will reveal himself as more than just power or authority or whatever, but as love itself. And what does love do? love seeks the good of the beloved. Love seeks to be in communion with what it loves. And our challenge is to make that love universal. That is, to extend it to all. Or as my Quaker friends put it, love your neighbor. No exceptions. No exceptions. Especially the neighbor who may be thought of as enemy. One of the hardest parts of Jesus' teaching. So, Christ is not Jesus' last name. Christ is a title. It means the anointed one. And I would submit to you that Christ is a name for the transcendent that exists in everything God has ever created. Now, that doesn't mean that God is a pantheist, that God's in everything. What it means is, yes, God is in everything that is good, but at the same time is still God and transcends that. So there's both an immanence and a transcendence that are part of defining God. And that becomes especially clear in the birth of Jesus. And especially clear, I think, even in Mary's yes to that birth. For who's Mary? I think one of the reasons the church celebrates Mary so much is she's human. And so she stands up for us more than maybe we think of as Jesus, because he's a bit confusing to us. He's human and divine. And we're not even sure how that interrelates. Although if you want, take some time about the seminary and take a course in Christology, and you can explore that. But Mary is just, and of course Mary is such a simple person. A maiden, impoverished, living under the cruelty of a harsh Roman Empire, a refugee when she gives birth to her child in a foreign place, and then has to flee the desire of Herod, a king, to murder her child, who he doesn't even know, but he suspects because he's heard he might be a Jewish king, he might be a threat to him. So it's an amazing thing for us to realize that there's a spaciousness to being alive and being connected to God implicitly because the Creator is present to what he creates. The way the Franciscan sisters used to say this to me when I was a child, I had no sense of its complete power then. They said, nothing continues in existence without the Creator's will. Nothing stays in creation without the Creator's will. And what seems oftentimes to be a disappearance from creation is simply the transfer of the energy that defines the reality back to its source, the Creator. Today, theologians are actually beginning to wonder, even beyond all of this, about who is this God, this Creator God, this Redeemer God, this inspiring God and Spirit. Who is this God? Because if these things are part of the reality of God, that means they've always been. There's no beginning and end to the reality that defines God. So they've always been. So we think of creation as having a beginning. But if God is always Creator, that's simply our way of putting something in a scale of time and space. But it doesn't say completely yet what all that could have been, could be, will be. Even now as I speak, I'm dumbfounded because I'm speaking in terms of time and space, which I have to use as my way of relating to this reality. But at the same time, I have to know that those words also are analogous. They're certainly not granting us the completeness of the mystery. G.K. Chesterton put this pretty well, I think. He said, your religion is not the church you belong to, but the cosmos you live inside of. That's your religion. The word religio means to tie together, to integrate, to pull things together into one. We're all involved, each one of us, every day. We're trying to kind of take these disparate parts of ourselves and focus them in a center that ties things together for us, that contributes to our happiness, our peace, and our virtue, and our commitment in day-to-day life. Our failure to do that is what we would describe as some level of sinfulness. That leads to chaos. That leads to disconnectedness. Remember Jesus' prayer, the prayer that at least several of the scriptures offer us just before his death, that they all be one. As I am you, you are in me, may they all be one in us. Unity is defining of God. And yet unity in a diversity of persons that, at least by way of our language, helps us to appreciate the immensity again of the reality of God. So I think the essential function of religion is to radically connect us with everything that ever has been or ever may be created, which is true, good, beautiful, and seeking oneness and unity. St. Thomas Aquinas called those four things transcendentals. In other words, he said these are transcendent things, realities, that are just other words for God. Truth, beauty, goodness, unity, union, communion. These are other things. Now, if we take seriously what we're about as Catholic Christians, and we're the religious tradition above all others who has a tremendous sacramental theology. In other words, we understand that God's presence can come to us through all these things that define creation, that are good, and that are beautiful, and that are true. In fact, there's within each of them a pull toward becoming one, a pull toward unity. If we allow that to happen with us, then we should be able to form our lives more radically in connection with each other. You come to this place, you walk up to this table, you receive the real presence of God's own Son, and you now are meant to bear that presence into the world. Are you doing that by creating unity? Are you doing that by seeking truth? Are you doing that by being good, being essentially moral? How are you about doing that? And are you aware that the other Christian virtues are all attendant to that? It's very hard to be loving of imperfect beings unless you can regularly work on reconciliation and forgiveness. I mean, how many of you can sustain your relationship with one another for very long without it? You two have been together for how many years? God knows. You were maybe at the beginning, for all I know. But I'm sure that the only reason that still remains the case is they practiced those virtues, which they knew were much more important to their remaining one than their being the same or always agreeing. So that's the call that's ours as part of the Christian life. Einstein put this in a very interesting way. He said, there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. Think about that. Even just look at the person next to you. You're sitting next to a mirror. Now, you're sitting next to a reality that should create for you wonder. You should be almost captured by that in some ways. Now, I admit that sounds highly idealistic, but the truth is, if we listen, if we slow down, if we pay attention, and especially if we sacrifice for each other, then I think we get very close to that level of wonder that defines things. You know, when I was growing up, I grew to fall in love with the Adirondack Mountains. So even to this day, I always spend at least a week or more in the Adirondack Mountains. Something about mountains lead me to a sense of the transcendence presence. Now, if I just think about them physically, I don't think I'd come to that. But I come to it because I have a sense that somehow they're representative of something so much larger than myself. I can't make a mountain. Now, maybe I was a human development agent or something. I had my own company. Maybe I could develop something. But the point is, we take for granted so many simple things. So look at a flower. Have any of you created a flower? Maybe you did. But the point is, there's an immense beauty to each and every little thing, the more we pay attention to it and whatever. Life really is filled with the miraculous. I'm always, a person says a lot more about themselves than about the reality they're talking about when they say something like, well, what happened to miracles? There's no miracles today. And I'm thinking, what? What do you mean? There's actually more of them than ever before. And a lot of them are a result of humans getting in touch with their potential creativity to, in fact, do things that contribute to truth, goodness, unity, and beauty in a variety of ways. I had a special experience of that. I probably mentioned that to some of you before. Years ago, when I was on a trip to Rome with one of our priests who spoke fluent Italian. I speak some Italian, but I wasn't as fluent as him. And I'd never been to St. Peter's. And he said, now here's the way you have to go to St. Peter's. He said, you don't come in one of those sideways. You come up the Via Conciliazione, he said, because then you see the kind of majesty of everything that defines St. Peter's. But he said, and when you get inside, he said, immediately stop, look. He said, now you're in a church that's larger than 2 football fields. He said, and it's filled with art, centuries, etc., all this tremendous beauty. And he said, now walk as far as you can over to your right. And when you get there, he said, you're going to cry. That's all he said to me. He didn't tell me where I was going to be there, whatever. So I walked into the cathedral, and it is imposing. And I walked to my right, and there is both an object of wonder, but an object of such depth of compassion that you find yourself crying. It's the Pietà, a mother holding her only dead son. And you feel like her. Michelangelo captures that. You feel just like her. If someone can, through stone, hew out reality, can elicit and challenge you to be a more compassionate being, imagine the power all of us have in the day-to-day of our lives to do that in relationship with each other. So, creation is the self-disclosure of God, but in the physical universe. And so, today, more and more, our theologians are telling us there's 2 incarnations. There's the incarnation that is creation, because creation represents the divine presence. And then there's that specific incarnation in the human that is identifiable in Jesus and yet is gift to us so that we get ourselves right. In other words, we're not simply human. We're more than human in the sense that we have the power to be divinized, to become one with God. In fact, that's our destiny. That's our call to do that. And we should be attempting to do that in this life by the ways in which we're in relationship with each other. And that's why freedom matters. Because we are the only reality so far that we know of who get a choice in this. Who get a choice in this. And it really is radically important that we see the value of making that choice. And so that's why on Christmas Day, and I think this is a little off-putting sometimes to those who come late to Mass on Christmas Day. You know, you come to the last Mass of the day, and you're thinking, geez, it's Christmas, and the church isn't even reading from one of the infancy narratives. It's not reading from Luke or Matthew. It's not even giving us the Christmas story. Instead, you hear from the great theologian John, who says simply, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. And so it's almost a philosophical sounding kind of treatise. And John, of course, ultimately is saying in all of this that and everything's made through the Word. And so it's C.S. Lewis captures this well in his children's stories, because in the Chronicles of Narnia, he has the Creator make everything by way of singing. God sings things into reality. He's like a divine Beethoven, you know. He sings things into life and into reality. And so creation is, according to John, speaks to us of an ubiquitous Christ, a Christ everywhere. Again, when those good nuns said to me, God is everywhere, they probably were right on target. God is everywhere. And they could almost say God is everything good. But the realization of that, and understanding that the nature that God is everywhere as love. See, when I thought God is everywhere, I thought, geez, he's there when I'm sinning, and that means I'm in for a lot of trouble in the future. Because I didn't understand that God's forgiveness is eternal. And it's ubiquitous. It's defining of God. It's not a choice for God to be forgiving. It's the nature of God to be free. It's the very identity of God, is to be forgiving. Divine mercy. That's God. And so when you begin to appreciate that, then you realize there's no retribution in God. All that is in God is restoration, not retribution. Jesus is a perfect example of this. I dare you to find anything in the gospel where he seeks to punish anybody. He's a healer, a persistent healer. He's not happy with where everybody's at, especially those who desire to take his life, those who don't respect him, doesn't value him, etc. But he does not allow that to act in kind. He doesn't make enemies. He receives them, he critiques them, but he also wants to restore them to something that they have not yet discovered themselves to be. And so everything created is an outpouring of the Creator. And so John wisely, I think, and I'm not sure if he did this so deliberately, but wisely in that wonderful prologue to his gospel, he describes God as light. Light. Now, we don't usually go to look at light. Rather, we look at other things through light. So it's light, but light informs everything. It brings everything into clarity. It brings it before us. And this is his description of God. A light has come into the world. The universal constant, if you want, the scientists would say, is light. It defines things. When I look up at the stars, I'm often reminded as I look up there at those stars that I'm looking at light that's been coming in this direction so that to my eyes, that's been there for billions of years. The object that actually has even elicited the light may be long gone, and I'm still getting the light. And if I could translate any images in that light, I actually could take myself back to being and seeing all that was there as the light progressed. Man, there is so much to wonder at. And so this is something that Rohr talks about, and other great writers have talked about. When I was in the seminary, I took a course in cosmology. And that was a required course towards your bachelor's degree of philosophy. And the professor, to my surprise, gave us a book to read as the cosmology textbook. And it was Teilhard de Chardin's The Divine Milieu. And what he tried to show us was that there's a cosmology that is purely scientific, and so it's based purely on empirical methodologies. But there's another cosmology, another cosmos, that is not any kind of one-time event, but it rather is an ongoing process from the beginning, on and on and on. This constant creative energy that is motivated simply by love, that defines us particularly, but also the entire universe. And many others have tried to capture the sense of it. And so, what I guess I'm getting to is Christmas says to me that humanity and divinity are meant to be one. And so in many instances, probably in all likelihood, when you and I die, and our energy goes through that radical transformation that we reference as resurrection, the words divinity and humanity will not be defining anymore. We'll be exactly what John says, we'll be new creatures. New creatures. Extraordinary creatures. and creatures who only continue to be forever as a result of the gift of the Creator. Or as we say, amazing grace. Amazing is almost too simple a word for it. I believe that our universe revolves around a coherent center that is God. And while we're still somewhat learning about the mystery of what that means, and we always will be, because a mystery is not something you can completely understand, but it's always available for further understanding, that mystery is God. And that mystery is also us. You know, as much as I might know you or get to know you, there'll always be more of you to know. I can't exhaust who you are in a lifetime. You couldn't help me. You couldn't sit down and start writing about yourself. Especially at your age, you forget half of what you remember, right? So I know I do, right? I'm picking on John here because I know him. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing that. So this divine presence seeks unity, seeks connection and communion with everything, not separation and division. No wonder Pope Francis said, our task as Christians is not to put up walls, but to build bridges. To build bridges, to connect, to be religio, to tie things together. God manifests the invisible and the visible. And notice in John's Gospel and in Paul's letters to the Colossians and to the Ephesians, they both emphasize that Christ existed in the beginning. In the beginning. They didn't say Jesus existed in the beginning. Christ existed in the beginning. So there's a Christian reality from the beginning, okay? If it was just Jesus, we wouldn't call ourselves Christians. We'd call ourselves Jesuits. But we're Christians. We're tied to the tripartite reality that defines God as Trinity. And so it's important, I think this is what Pope Francis has been trying to do with his encyclical Laudato Si, and others are trying to do. If we do not have a sense that there's something more to us than is visible and that we ourselves are perhaps even aware of, namely our personal sacredness, then we're always going to struggle to see God in the reality of our world. Jesus is this Christ, historical manifestation in time, and all physical matter has been anointed with eternal purpose by this Christ, this Word, this one that emanates from the reality of God. And so Jesus, I think, is a map for a time-bound life, a time-bound, very personal life. But Christ is the blueprint for all time and space and beyond life itself. And so there's a kind of a universal pattern found in the person of Jesus that is critical for our becoming other Christs, others anointed ones. And of course, that's what baptism does too. It anoints us into recognizing our potential for that. But it's solely dependent upon those who see that we're baptized to live in such a way that they can help us, enable us to put on that Christ. But always it involves self-emptying. It involves sacrifice. Sacra facie, to make sacred by serving others, by pouring out yourself. And so I should say, hopefully you can say this, I live not now for me, I live for Christ, as Paul says. I live to pour myself out in order to be filled with what defines God, so that I will become a son of God, a child of God. I will become a daughter of God. And so Jesus is the archetypical human being. He shows us what it means to be fully human. And so that's what's true in Jesus can also be true in you and in me. So I know that we've created around Christmas a lot of things that we owe to St. Francis, the typical manger scenes and things like that. But we should constantly remind ourselves of the reality of that Christmas. You know, here's a refugee couple, persecuted by a foreign power, subject totally to their viciousness and to their complete disrespect for the value of the people they subjugate. etc. Now, our chance through this child is to make the world something different. Our chance is to hopefully contribute to the new creation in and through our persistent and sacrificial acknowledgement and respect for each other. And that is much needed in our world. We should not be labeling people and demeaning them because of their race, or their gender, or nationality, or any number of other things. We're all children of God. And until we acknowledge that, and we understand the nature of that God as infinite love, and that we're supposed to, in fact, reflect that in terms of the way we relate to each other, until we get there, we're still very much out of paradise. We're out of the famous Garden of Eden. We're lost. We're in the desert, and we're lost children of God. We need to find our way home. But the way home does lie within us. And each of us may not be able to have that much radical effect on this large creation that we're in. God somehow believes that we do, or we wouldn't be here. And we're important to that task, it seems to me, each of us in our own way. So I leave you then tonight with this, a kind of a sense of this, I think, by reminding you that in Jesus, the Christ, the Anointed One, God's own broad, deep, and all-inclusive worldview is made available to us. Jesus asked us to follow him. I don't find any place, at least in the Scripture, where Jesus asks us to worship him. He asks us to follow him. Come, follow me. I don't think he said to Peter or anybody, build a church and come and worship me every day. Come, follow me. Now we do this, it's not wrong that we do this, because it's our way, our human way of kind of respecting the Christ. But there's a deeper, more abiding way of respecting him. Take the communion you receive, take it to the world. Take it to the world. Take the holy water you bless yourself with, remind you that you have promises to keep from your baptism. Take it into the world. Make that consistently part of what defines you and how you relate to things in the world. So, Christmas, what's the predominant symbol probably for us as Christians at Christmas time? It's light. Candles, Christmas trees, lights everywhere, all kinds of lights, all colors and all over the place. We want to see in the midst of the darkest days of the year for us here in our particular part of creation. We want to see, however, like Christ sees, like Jesus sees. And they see with infinite mercy, infinite compassion, infinite respect, infinite value. And that is what defines us as Christian people. And our great act of solidarity with that will have, if it ever hasn't had, always some act of sacrificial reality to it. There's a cross that we all get put on in some place, at some time. Some of you have already dealt with those crosses in a variety of ways. And you deal with them best, you deal with them not alone, but in, again, a communion that strengthens your bonds with others. Paul tells us that he was given knowledge of this mystery. And Paul's writings precede the Gospels. In fact, all of Paul's writings were written before the first Gospel was written. And they contain what I call a radical incarnationalism. In that he's saying there is only Christ, he's everything, he's in everything. And thus, when you look at the last book of the Scripture, the book of Revelation, and look at the last words that we call sacred script, it captures it in just so simple words. It says, in the end, God will be all in all. God will be all in all. You, me, everything else that God has created. God will be all in all. And that's the kind of cosmic identity that the letter to the Colossians and the other Pauline letters tries to capture. God is endlessly created, endlessly outward, endlessly self-emptying. And you are proof to God that you are in fact connected as a Christian when you can bring yourself to see Christ in everyone else, and then respect that Christ by the way in which you're committing yourself to them. An authentic God experience always should expand your seeing, never constrict it. Anything that draws you out of yourself in a positive way is operating as God for you at the very moment that happens. And hopefully that happens often and frequently for all of us. And then lastly, I always say lastly, but I keep going. Just read you a quick quote from Father Moore's book here. A couple of sentences. Faith at its essential core is accepting that you are accepted. We cannot deeply know ourselves without also knowing the one who made us. We cannot fully accept ourselves without accepting God's radical acceptance of every part of us. You are wonderful. You are wonderful. And I hope you will see that and know that and then live out of that. Because in that awareness, hopefully, you will be as sacrificial as Jesus was, as giving, and hopefully as revolutionary in terms of bringing the purpose of this creation to its ultimate end. All of us one in God. Thank you for your attention, and I did all this within an hour. God bless you.
A little ice.
It's not just water. Life.
Yes. Thank you, Monsignor Leising. Just a reminder, or if you have joined us tonight as a visitor, Our Lady of Pompeii Parish here, we have so many spiritual programs going on. If you'd like to partake in any, you're always welcome. We have daytime ministries, evening ministries coordinated by Sister Joyce and Deacon Greg Feary as well. And we have information on all of our programs in the back of the church. Thanks to Sister Joyce for all the efforts in coordinating this Faith Enrichment Speaker Series. So grateful for putting it together. Our next speaker will be January 13th. Francesca Buchkowski will present Life's Sacred Places Shape Our Relationship with God. So if you'd like to join us that evening, it's obviously Monday, January 13th. I'd like to, some people don't have a parish home, parish family. I just want you to know you're always welcome here. If you're looking for a parish family, we have our Christmas Mass schedule. If you'd like to join us, 2 4 o'clock Masses on Christmas Eve. And then we have the 10 p.m. Mass as well. And then Christmas Day, we have 8:30 and 10. If you'd want a place to pray Christmas Mass with. Thanks again for attending, and there's some light refreshments for you to enjoy. And if you're able or so inclined, we have a Goodwill offering basket in the back and at the exit over here, over there. If you can help us out, if not, no problem at all. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the evening, and please join us for some fellowship and some refreshments. God bless. Thanks, Monsignor.